All right, and we are recording. Thank you guys so much for coming. This is our third parent meeting session of High School 101, trying to equip all of our stakeholders with an ability to articulate the ins and outs of high school as they have dramatically changed over the last 10, 20 years. Today's big meeting is going to be about assessment and next steps. When we were kids, there was a little bit less that you really had to consider. You knew that if you wanted to go to college, you had to take an SAT, things of that nature. But now there's a lot of opportunities for kids, and based off of what they want with their post-secondary goals, it's important that they know really what are the ways that they can best serve themselves. Another thing that we'll discuss within this, besides those assessments that you see, is really how does this impact the opportunities that they have for themselves, and then some of the important links that'll be at the end. Just a shameless plug, we will be on December 20th having our fourth session, which will really dive deep into suggested course sequences based off of kind of what your kid wants after they leave our Murchie. Far too often, things are kind of college prep, and so you'll see that it tries to push kids in one direction. Here at our Murchie, we have a very diverse community and a very diverse student body in terms of what they want afterwards. So we want to make sure parents are equipped to strongly advise the course selections that they choose while they're here, to make sure that they at least can attain what they want afterwards. So that'll be our big focus for today, and then as well our focus on the 20th. So starting with the PSAT, the first four assessments that we'll talk about, 3 out of those 4, the PSAT, the SAT, and the Accuplacer, are all created and facilitated by College Board. Something that's important to understand is College Board is also the group that pushes out AP classes. So there is a lot of connection that comes from these 3 assessments and AP preparation, and also this idea of being nationally normed, so that universities that they might be interested in that are outside of the state of Georgia will all recognize these assessments in a similar fashion. The first one is the PSAT. Here at our Murchie, we offer this and ask all of our 10th graders to take it. More of a preparation based off of, it's their first time to take that assessment, and really just trying to get them, to see what that level of assessment is. It is meant to prepare them for the SAT, which typically they'll take in their 11th and 12th grade year. Our 11th grade students, we do have some of them that will retake that PSAT. It's a very small population, a very targeted group, really focused on National Merit Scholarship. As I was prepping for this meeting, I was looking throughout the websites that the links are on there. And one of the things they talked about is even through PSAT scores, students can have access to over $300 million of scholarships based off of how they perform on that. National Merit is another layer of that, but that is something that they take as an 11th grader to be able to see where they rank within National Merit and the scholarship opportunities there. We host the one assessment in October. This is something that has already taken place this year. Scores typically come back around December, and so that'll be something that we disclose, and students have access to that digitally, as well as something that we can access here at the school. It is very similar structured to the SAT, in the fact that it has 3 components: a reading component, a writing component, and a math component. Even the way that the times are layered out is very similar to an SAT. It typically takes about 3 to 4 hours to complete. There are sections, and then there are breaks that are required to make sure that you give them brain breaks. Really, this is focusing on that opportunity for scholarship, but also as kids are in 10th grade, really their junior and senior year is when there's a lot of opening for AP courses. And so the PSAT can serve in that capacity to really show them, hey, these are the ones that we would suggest you taking. It's kind of a little known fact of the PSAT, is that it does guide some of the choices that your students might make in 11th and 12th grade year in terms of the AP classes that, based off of their assessment scores with the PSAT, that College Board thinks that they would be successful in. So keep that in mind if you have a 10th grader that has just taken it. One of the questions that I asked when we had our last parent meeting was really kind of talking about the differences of ACT and SAT. I think far too often we push students to an SAT in terms of educators in general. And in certain circumstances, that is 100% appropriate. But depending on the skill set of your child, it might be a better option to take an ACT. So what you'll see on this screen is really just kind of facts from both. There is a little disclaimer on the bottom that's incredibly important. Right now, the University System of Georgia, except for Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia, have waived this requirement for entrance. So your Kennesaw States, your West Georgias, those type of universities aren't even really asking for this. It is something that can, create more opportunity for them, maybe in terms of acceptance and putting them up against somebody else. But the only current schools in the state of Georgia that are requiring is going to be UGA and Georgia Tech. So that's something that's important. But the disclaimer on bottom is just that you always should look into the requirements of that post-secondary institution. If your kid wants to go to Alabama, that might not be the case. And so it's incredibly important that you're looking at that, because some will outweigh the other. Some of your higher institutions will really expect an SAT versus most institutions will accept both. So just be privy to that disclaimer. SAT typically is going to be just comprised of the three areas: reading, writing, language, and math. So more ELA math focused. But then your ACT does have a science component. What the SAT does is they layer within the reading components a science and social studies piece that is really just meant for reading comprehension. So it's not assessing, do they understand the science and social studies topics, as much as can they read this different text and be able to comprehend and pull out information from it. Versus the ACT has a standalone science section. So I always tell parents, if you have that kid that might not be necessarily reading inclined, maybe that's not their best skill set, but math and science just is, that was the brain that I had, then ACT is probably a better option if the institution accepts both. There is a couple other things that dealing with math. SAT has a math calculator section and a non-calculator section, so they dictate that, but it also has a formula sheet. The ACT is going to allow the calculator on all sections, an approved calculator, but does not allow does not have a formula sheet. Those are things you have to memorize. The way the ACT really kind of thinks that that's okay is that most of their questions are going to be more straightforward questions, not asking for a lot of formula usage, and instead more conceptual mathematical understanding. The SAT is going to be kind of those deeper level thinking questions. So that kind of depends on your kid's skill set too, right? If you have a kid that would rather do fewer questions, but be forced to really think about those questions to respond and pull out answer, ACT is going to be a good option, versus the SAT will be a good option, versus the ACT is going to be more for those straightforward, more recall type of question answers, than really having to dive deep and pull out information. The ACT, because of that, does have less time for questions. So if you have that student that might have anxiety about the time frame, they might lean towards the SAT. And then as well, that idea of a scaled score. You have SAT scaled score goes from 400 to 1600. That's not including that optional essay section. And then the ACT has that 1 to 36. And so as you're looking at these institutions, that also might be something that you start to consider is, what are the typical cut scores of these institutions to allow my child to enroll? That can help you in determining, do I take it again? Do I take it multiple times? Or which one that you take. But keep that in mind that currently USG, the only ones that are requiring this for entrance is going to be UGA and Georgia Tech. Institutions might still use it to rank order their acceptance, but it's not a requirement to enroll. All right, so now let's move to the Accuplacer. The Accuplacer is also built within College Board. This is really meant it's developed by College Board to really discuss the idea of student readiness. Are kids that might not be ready to take an SAT, ACT, do they have the readiness needed to be able to enroll in an institution? Typically, students that take Accuplacer are going to be kids that are interested in going to like a 2-year college, a community college like a Georgia Highlands. But this allows the institution really to kind of see where they're at, beyond the GPA. Where does your child fall in terms of being ready for post-secondary level work? Do they need a remedial math course? Back in the day, whenever we were in institutions, you would have to take those remedial courses at the beginning. They would front load those before you jumped into anything. Now, one of the common trends, not everybody's doing, but one of the common trends is called co-requisite support. So we kind of do that here at the high school. If you're not necessarily good at math, we'll place you in algebra and algebra support at the exact same time. So you're getting that support at the same time that you're able to take the algebra. A lot of institutions are using that model because it allows a kid to still complete within 4 years if they're doing full time. Versus in the past, whenever the remedial had to come first, it extended the duration of their collegiate experience. And so a lot of schools, if you see that co-requisite support, that's what it is. It's remedial classes that we had to take. Smaller institutions will use the Accuplacer to really see where you're at. It can be used for college readiness, especially in situations when kids have what's called enrollment deficiency. So this was something I actually just learned recently. Some of your smaller institutions will allow students to not have the GPA rankings that they post on their website, or maybe some of the course requirements that they post on their website. For example, Spanish 1, Spanish 2. It is a case-by-case basis, but the Accuplacer scores can help strengthen that person's ability to get into a school, even if they don't meet those requirements. So it's important that if you have that child that is really kind of swaying back and forth between maybe tech school or a smaller institution or a community college, that this is something that they can take that can kind of gauge their readiness and what their path would look like in terms of acceptance, enrollment, and how they move forward. This is very similar to the Accuplacer, is very similar to what you would see on the SAT and the PSAT, since it is created by College Board. It's comprised of reading, writing, math, and an essay. But when you look at it, if you click through the links, the knowledge assessment is incredibly less intense. It'll start even in numeracy facts to be able to start and see where you're at. And then as you complete those assessments, they hand you other assessments to be able to truly gauge the level that you need to be placed in. There are 5 score bands that allow the institutions really to kind of prescribe a plan. So you'll see that if you peruse through the links that are within the Accuplacer at the end of the presentation, you'll see what that looks like. But they give a really good explanation of how they take those results and create a plan for your child that could be most successful post-secondary. The last one is the ASVAB that we'll discuss. The ASVAB is called the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. This is really an assessment that students can take prior to enlisting in the military that allows them to really gauge, what does it look like for me enrolling? Some kids might not think the military is for them, but they take an ASVAB and they realize they score a 1, which is the percentile-based highest score. And the military says, hey, we're going to put you behind a computer. You're going to be doing logistics. We're going to train you how to do this. That might be, something that they would consider, versus when they think joining the military, they think, put a gun in my hand, put me on the front line. And so keep that in mind, that as students are really questioning what are the next steps for us, the ASVAB is something that as they visit recruiters doesn't mean that they are signing up, but it means that it gives them an opportunity to see, well, where would I rank and how does that open up opportunities? There are 4 domains: verbal, math, science and technical is kind of put together, and then spatial. Spatial is the smallest component. The others are pretty much spread evenly between. And then there's 2 different formats. Some places will use the computerized and adaptive test, the CAT ASVAB. It really, max time is 173 minutes. They're saying some kids are finishing in around an hour because it's something that as you answer question 1, that determines the question 2 that you get. So, and that test, it's not the same for everybody, versus the paper pencil, which is typical, is max time 149 minutes, and it is set. It is something that everybody gets the same test. These are mostly taken within the recruitment process. Once again, just want to reiterate, it doesn't mean that they're signing up for the military. It just means that they're going to be able to see what options they might have. And then scores are percentile based. So you'll see those 5 categories, starting with 5 being the lowest category, 4, 3B, 3A, 2, and 1, 6 total categories. I think it's important, they talk about on the links, if you look through it, anybody that scores a 3A, a 2, or a 1, that's when you really start talking about some incentives in terms of signing bonuses, things of that nature. And then also each branch of the military has different expectations for entrance requirements. So the Air Force might have, you know, a cut score of one thing versus the Army has a cut score of something else. And so within the links, it allows you to go through each of the enlistment branches, and you can kind of see what their options are and what the requirements are. They can take the assessment multiple times still without signing up as part of a recruitment process, but they have to wait at least 1 calendar month in between. So that's something to consider. Ultimately, y'all, you know, Mr. Pethel talks about it every morning. Your kids probably are tired of hearing it, but here at Armurchie, we're building a legacy of excitement for the opportunities that lay ahead. These assessments are really trying to gear the idea of, okay, what opportunities do my kids want while they're in high school, but also after high school, and how can these assessments help them be able to achieve that? So keep in mind that the things that we've discussed while they're here sometimes are required for dual enrollment, not currently, but also can sometimes aid them in getting into dual enrollment when otherwise they wouldn't be able to. Same thing in terms of post-secondary assessment. Really, it's attempting to get them ready for college readiness type of tests. And then opportunities after, whether they're going tech school, University System of Georgia, military enlistment, all of those areas, even though they might not be required, can really help, you know, show them what options that they have, and then also provide them incentives in terms of scholarship or in terms of military incentive. Here's a bunch of links, pretty much where I got all of this information. The only one that I will tell you to be careful with is the ACT versus SAT Starters Guide. When I was looking through it, I did notice there was a few mistakes. It wasn't necessarily wrong information, but maybe placed in the wrong way. So I would not necessarily take it as gold as much as a guide, as a parent and student conversation piece. But the other ones are from the institutions that create those. So whether it's ASVAB, PSAT, SAT, or Accuplacer, those are vetted and credible. So just be careful as you look through that one link, but otherwise the other links are all things that you could be able to look through to gather more information. After we exit, if you wouldn't mind to be able to take the survey just to give some feedback. Also, it puts your name in terms of you being able to say, I was at this meeting. If you attend a specific amount of meetings, we have a little gift for you at the end to say that you have passed High School 101. So feel free to do that afterwards. And at this point, I will stop the recording.